Hi guys, I hope you're keeping well. I'm just going to go very quickly through the People in History essay that I said for you the other day. So I told you to either do a named Renaissance writer or scientist. Now, not all of them came back as either a writer or scientist. You can't pick a painter or a sculptor if you're asked specifically for a writer or a scientist during the period, okay? So you must only choose a writer or a scientist and you must name them. So that's what the question has demanded of you, okay? So first thing you need to do is decide who you're going to write about by looking at your options. So who are your choices then? Well, for a writer, the obvious choice is William Shakespeare. So some of you did pick William Shakespeare, and that's the obvious choice for a writer during that period. If you decided to go with the scientist, then you would most likely write about Galileo Galilei, because you know the most about both of those two people. That's why you would choose those. They're the ones you studied the most, okay? Doesn't matter who you decided to go for. Whichever one you decided to pick, you'll start your essay the same way, by giving a brief overview of the period, the Renaissance. So you have to give an introduction to your essay. So a sample introduction would go a little bit like this. So the Renaissance began in Florence, Italy around 1400. A growing interest in learning and questioning old ways led people to develop new ideas. Methods that had been used during the Middle Ages began to change. Painters and sculptors emerged with new techniques and understanding. So that's just a bit of a background. Then the next sentence or two would be to either introduce your writer or your scientist. So the first one here I've done tells you that I'm going to talk about Galileo. So it says, new medical knowledge emerged as people looked for evidence and explanations. Galileo was one such scientist who had a great impact during this period. Galileo was an Italian who studied maths and so on. Okay, so you'd go on to finish that then by starting your second paragraph and doing a third and then a final fourth paragraph with all of your points, okay? If you decided to do William Shakespeare, then that would change here. And you would say, during the Middle Ages, most writing was in Latin and was about religion. During the Renaissance, writing in the vernacular, which means the local language, began to develop. William Shakespeare was one such writer. Shakespeare was the most important English writer, and so on. And you would go on to finish that essay about William Shakespeare. So the first few sentences here, you see, would be the same no matter what you're writing about, because you have to talk about the period a little bit. And then you would either go on to talk about, you'd introduce who you were going to talk about, whether it was the writer, Shakespeare, or Galileo as the scientist. Okay? So if you decided to do Shakespeare, you have to include the following points. And these are just bullet points, you would need to expand on them. So for Shakespeare, you would need to include the fact that he was the most important writer in English during the Renaissance. So he was the most important writer to write in English during the Renaissance. He was born in Stratford-upon-Avon, but he spent most of his time in London. There were many theatres in London because Queen Elizabeth I loved plays. At first, Shakespeare was an actor, but then he began to write plays, and he wrote about 35 altogether. His plays are still performed today, and two of his most famous plays are Romeo and Juliet and Hamlet. He also wrote 150 sonnets to a mysterious person known as the Dark Lady. He established and owned a theatre in London called the Globe, and when the Globe burned down in 1613, he returned to Stratford-upon-Avon, where he died in 1616. Okay, so if you chose then to do Galileo, again, these are just bullet points, you would need to expand on these points. So for Galileo, you continue on your essay by saying that he was an Italian who also studied mathematics. When he learned about a new invention, the telescope, so he didn't invent the telescope, he just perfected it, if you like. He built one of his own and he used it to study the stars. His observations convinced him that Copernicus was right, that the sun, not the earth, was the centre of the solar system, and that the earth moved around the sun. When he published his ideas, the Pope condemned them because they were contrary to the Bible and what was the belief at the time. Galileo was accused of teaching heresy, which are false ideas, and he had to give up his beliefs. But his ideas spread quickly and in time came to be accepted by all. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a photograph of each of those pages now, and I'm going to upload them to Firefly as well. And what I want you to do is I want you to look at them, and I want you to, doesn't matter which one you actually picked, I want you to put those notes into your copy anyway, and I want you to do them separately. So I want you to do William Shakespeare and an outline for that essay, and then I want you to do Galileo and an outline for that essay, and I want you to include the introduction, and I want you to write a conclusion paragraph to each essay as well. I want you to photograph those and send them to me, send them back to me, and you have until next Tuesday, so Tuesday the 24th I think it is, at the end of the day. Okay? Thanks guys, take care.